Hello and welcome back to the Beyond the Ice Walls Second Ring series. We're back on this beautiful journey we have done for over 10 episodes. In fact, this is the 11th episode of this series. So, for those who do not know and don't know what we're looking at, then let me explain very briefly. This is a map with a projection that allows you to see divided both the entire world as we know it, the world behind the ice walls, which is another way of calling Antarctica, but also shows the rings beyond the ice walls. We have a first ring, which is called the Atlas, which we have explored in the first series we have done on this map, or rather on the original map this came from. And then this is the second series, as we exited the first ring after the ice walls, went over the mountain ring, as written right here, and we went to the region called Akupara, a way larger ring which is full of mysteries and hidden continents that are being explored in this series. So, if that piqued your interest, keep watching. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's just start by recapping which continents we did so far. We watched from the start here, Waldron, Polybius, Iram. We went into this area right here with Azania, Awas, New Cahokia, Minerva, Micronesia. We went to Asgard, the First Empire, Jotunheimer, Peyudwal, Anubis, the Sky Caverns, the Titanic Forests. We went and watched the Frozen Wastes, Greater Lemuria, Patmos, the island of Yakub. We went and did many more, like Amphetamina, Umurangi, Formosa Ultima, Eden, the Primordial Garden, Terra Nova, Amun-Ra, and of course, the ones we did last time, like Horus, the Great Pillars of Akupara, the Garden Isles, and Teslanesia. Today, we go east, not south. In fact, we have to recover one I decided to skip last time because I wanted to focus on it for an entire video. We're of course talking about Mu, the Empire of Stonemen. So, already, most of you might know that Mu is something that is well known. It's one of those continents, lost landmasses, that has been talked about widely in the online space and even offline since the early 1900s, but even before, as we will look in later. In this map, in the Beyond the Ice Walls second ring map, the story of Mu is very different from the one we know, or rather, the story of how it got here in Akupara, the second ring, is complicated. I've seen different sources. Originally, by what I understand, the story was that Mu was moved, kind of like with a distortion mechanism, to appear outside of the ice walls. But from what I can see from the lore now, Mu was destroyed in the land behind the ice walls and was recreated in Akupara.
Before we continue, I want to ask you if you can put hype on the video. This is a new feature. Apparently hype is really important, so we can, reach more audiences. That would be nice of you. Okay, let's continue.
Let's talk about Mu. To talk about Mu, we have to go somewhere behind the ice walls. We have to go back to the lands that we all know. Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, and South America. As the story of Mu does not start outside the ice walls, but instead it starts inside of them. In fact, Mu is considered the biggest lost continent of the world, or at least the biggest lost continent that we know of. It was first mentioned by Augustus Le Plongeon, a British-American historian and antiquarian who studied pre-Columbian civilizations in America and their structures. He was fascinated with the ruins and writings of the Mayan civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula, which I'll be zooming into right now. So we're talking about a British-American man that started researching the ancient civilizations of the world. Specifically, he was interested in this area right here. Mainly this peninsula that we can see right here. This is basically what is considered as the homeland of the Maya people. The Maya people obviously being one of the first nations of the New World, Native American civilizations that created long-spanning states and cultures and religions that were discovered once Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, from the European perspective, of course. The Mayans were there for millennia. And as we will see later, they might have been there even before humanity reached multiple continents. So this Augustus had translated a sacred book of the Quiche people, one of these native peoples of the area in Mexico, from their ancient language to English, and had found, according to him, proof that the Proto-Maya, of course that means the people that came before the Maya but in that area, were even older than the ancient Egyptians and ancient Greeks, and that the proof was that the sacred book mentioned a lost continent submerged by a catastrophe, picking up the concept by another historian, Charles Etienne Brassier de Beaubourg, whose translation of the Truano Codex revealed the mention of Mu. So the name Mu, which we can see the continent of right here, comes from this Truano Codex. The Truano Codex is very controversial because it was translated with the Latin alphabet, and a lot of people think it was not as revealing as they say, but according to this Charles de Beaubourg, he translated it and he found mention of Mu. And when Augustus Le Plongeon translated his findings from the Quiche people, then the two things fused together to find out this new continent that was submerged and lost to time. According to Le Plongeon, this Mu was actually confused or maybe identified with Atlantis, so he believed that the continent these people were talking about was not something that existed somewhere like near the Mayans or maybe in the Pacific, but instead was far away into the west, in the Atlantic Ocean. But the position of this new continent, Mu, would be highly debated. In fact, it wasn't sure exactly where this continent was located because there was no sign of positioning that was mentioned in these records. In the following decades, from the discovery of Augustus, a man by the name of James Churchward wrote a series of books regarding this rediscovered landmass, such as The Motherland of Man, the Lost Continent of Mu. He claimed that during his time as a soldier in India, in fact, this is the 1920s if I recall correctly, and by 1920, India was still under the British Empire. So he would have been sent as a British soldier to be stationed in India. And during his stay in India, he was given access to a set of clay tablets written in the Naga Maya language, which few in India could understand. A priest in India taught him the language and told him the tablets were written east, possibly in Mu itself, or maybe Burma, which is the country next to India, which is now called Myanmar, right here. So as this man, this James Churchward, stays in India, he tries finding more information about it. And soon another discovery happens, which in this case is not in India, but in the, I believe it was still in Mexico, some valley north of Mexico, in the northern part. Another quantity of tablets is found there. So these two discoveries are James Churchward is informed about this discovery, so he starts to theorize about what this could mean, why the language was the same, why there were these connections, and the conclusions he arrived to were because after learning the language, after many months of trying to learn this incredibly ancient language with the few resources he had, while also stationed as a soldier in India, James Churchward managed to partially translate the tablets, and he explained that they talked about a lost massive continent, where humanity originated from. So according to these writings on the tablets, this is not just some lost continent, this is the homeland of humanity. Now, as of now, there are multiple theories about the homeland of humanity. Of course, the most popular one is that out of Africa theory, which explains that humanity originated from Africa, possibly somewhere in Tanzania, Kenya, maybe Ethiopia or Somalia, and from this area it spread out all in the continents. There are multiple theories though, some that say they became in the Caucasus, some that say that the Garden of Eden is the place of birth of humanity, of course, but the Garden of Eden's position is debated. It could be in, it could be in the Middle East, it could be even in America according to some, it could be in Africa as I mentioned earlier. According to these new findings that originate from this Maya part of the world, well, then it might have not been in one of the traditional continents of Earth. Instead, it could have been in a forgotten additional continent. So according to James, the tablets taught him that an ancient super advanced civilization called the Nakal, was created by a serpent deity. The serpent deity, which is called the Narayana, or Shesha, as I mentioned in one of my older videos. And the whole thing about the serpentine deity, the serpent goddess, this reptile-related deities is like a kind of a trope, honestly. We can find it very often in the histories and mythologies of humanity. You can find things like Quetzalcoatl from Mexico, again, a serpent god. We can find things, as I said, from India. So in this example, he found a mention of an Indian deity that created the world, but in Mayan scripts. So once again, we have something interesting happening where civilizations that are very separate geographically one from the other have common themes, but the serpent deity also is related to things that we find in ancient Greek mythology. Of course, the Hydra, which was a regenerating snake that could endlessly recreate its heads. We have the Ouroboros, another Greek one, that is a snake that eats its own tail. We can see that very often. Even in Norse mythology, we have things like Jormungandr, which is the snake of the world, as long as the entire, extremities of the world. And yeah, we can find this theme very, very, very often in a lot of different mythologies. We could even say that the Chinese dragons, by how they look, they're kind of serpents. They're very serpentine-like, even if they do have legs and arms. And of course, let's not forget the Aboriginal beliefs of Australia, where in Dreamtime religion, a snake is also featured as one of the main deities. So with that all said, we can see this, serpent, snake, drake creature referenced very oftenly in the history of humanity and in its mythology. So going back to Mu, we can see this related to the origin of the creation myth, or Mu, as said by James Churchward. Mu was also, as I said, the home of humanity, and this civilization rose to prominence thousands of years before ancient Egypt, for example. Mu had colonies in other continents, and had 7 major cities, which I will show in this map I will show here. And its contact with the humans outside of its continent was one of the reasons other civilizations rose after its end. The Nakal, the people of Mu, were so advanced that simply contacting and trading and sharing knowledge with the other people of the world made them go and advance themselves. So as you can see, these were just like so far beyond what the rest of humanity was like. Imagine it kind of like when the Europeans arrived in Australia, while the Australians were not really used to seeing outside the outside world. They were definitely not used to seeing technologies that were so advanced for their civilization as the Europeans were bringing in. So this is kind of the entire theory about Mu. It's just this super advanced civilization with the Nakal people and all of that. But that's not it, actually. It does continue. In fact, the continent's death is one of the most important parts of the story of Mu. So how did this entire civilization just vanish? Because where is the traces of it, right? So the end of the civilization is in pre-biblical times, so we have very, very, very little information about it. This is said once again by James Churchward, and it was by a series of earthquakes and volcanic explosions which wiped Mu off the map, leaving barely any trace of it. Literally an entire continent the size of Australia added with Europe, maybe even more, was just completely vanished in one day. That's literally how James Churchward expands to it. And I don't really believe that's the case. Obviously, one day just sounds way too much. If you think about it in creation myth kind of sense, God punished the continents because of reasons, then it might make sense, but apart from that, it's not really feasible. If it was a slow decline and death, then it could make more sense. If you look into the Pacific, which is where Mu is thought to be existing at, it is sometimes confused with Lemuria, which was another sunken continent, although I don't know why this is even mentioned by people, because Lemuria was in the Indian Ocean. It united, southern India, Madagascar, and Australia. I don't know why people confuse the two, because Lemuria is here, and Mu was believed to be here, it used to be the stepping stone of all civilization, so it had to unite North America, South America, Australia, Asia, and of course from Asia they would come into Europe and then to Africa and blah blah blah. So that's the concept of it. In fact, if you look at the cities of the map of Mu, as believed by James Churchward, you can actually see parts of the, I believe Tonga is there, Hawaii is there, like the Easter Island is there. So there's all these islands that are very famous, and they're all shown as part of that map because of the fact that they were basically the cities, because they were the peaks of the landmass that was Mu. Also explained by this James Churchward is the fact that the king of Mu, like the major king of Mu, the one that made it rise as an empire, was called Ra. Yes, Ra, literally Ra. If you're wondering what that means, well, you know, in these times, the Egyptians were very tribal still. This is way before the Egyptians created like the advanced civilizations they ended up having. And according to him, basically this is the proof that the ancient Egyptian god Ra came from the king of Mu, which means that basically this contact between the Muans, or as I said before, the Nakals, and the Egyptians was not at the same level, to the extent where one king could be seen as a god by the other civilization, and they deified him and they kept believing in him way later compared to the end of Mu. So when it comes to geography, the continent of Mu was stretching from Easter Island somewhere here all the way to the Marianas somewhere here, I believe, yes. And then, so I'm just gonna like try to shape it. Of course we have the shape right there, but I can't, I mean I could do something cool, I guess. I haven't really used some tools that I have at my disposal. Let me see if I can do something, alright? Okay, yeah, I did it. So I managed to drag Mu. So we're gonna try dragging Mu and positioning it where it was supposed to be in, according to James Churchward. And oh my god, this actually fits perfectly in size compared to what they described it as. Of course, it won't be stretched as I wanted to, but the size is right. So let's just say it went from the Marianas, which are here, to Easter Island, which I guess would be somewhere here. We stretch it. Yeah, it would be something like this, I guess, because in this version, the Easter Island would be probably here in this type of map, in this type of projection, I believe. Should be like, yeah, I think it's about here. So this is what Mu would look like. Maybe a bit more fat in the south. Yeah, probably reaches a bit more south here compared to Antarctica or the ice walls. So yeah, I think this is about what Mu would look like. Maybe a bit more south. Yeah, I think it's supposed to be a bit more south. But yeah, the concept of it is that this is how it looks like. So yeah, this is what Mu would look like, and if we see the geography of it, it's even more interesting because we can see things like the massive plains that are characteristic of this continent, which are all these like grassland kind of thing, and even this yellowish kind of color. But also we have a lot of estuaries, a lot of rivers, massive like continent spanning rivers that are comparable only to things like the Nile River and the Amazon River. And we also have mountains, and we also have, I think, very importantly, natural harbors like these, which are very, very important for any seafaring civilization that wants to make contact with other ones. And of course, let's not forget about the tropical coasts. That probably meant that by being used to all these diseases that were coming in the coastlines, the civilization that rose up to it was also medically advanced because it had to survive to them as well. So yeah, it's just such a massive thing to even consider, honestly. Just look at a map of the world with it. I mean, it looks kind of crazy. It looks literally just crazy because you have like this whole other thing, which I guess it was described to be like the second biggest continent, only after Eurasia, if you count Europe and Asia as a single continent. But even then, if you make the argument of division between Europe and Asia, then this would be the biggest continent, basically. And yeah, that's just almost unthinkable. So yeah, coming back to just Mu, it's just interesting to see how this concept was brought on, and also one of the connections that he made to explain the influence of Mu across the world was that basically this symbol of the sun, which according to him was like the main symbol of the Nakal people, could be found basically across all the world, but specifically it could be found across Peru, which with the Inca symbol of the literal Inti, the sun god. Then it could be found, of course, in Babylon as the symbol of Babylon and the Tigris and Euphrates River. Of course, it could be found in Japan, the rising sun of Japan, and also, of course, Egypt, the Eye of Ra, the god of the sun, and so on and so forth. So all these symbols he thinks are basically the best proof we have of all these connections between the continents, even geographically, and of course even structurally, the architecture, like the fact that we have pyramids everywhere from like South, North America, Asia, Egypt, Europe, etc., etc. Well, I guess actually Europe doesn't have pyramids as far as I know. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, now it does. I know there's a couple pyramids in Southern Europe, but that's, I think, for later. But yeah, this is really, really interesting. And the thing is, it wasn't even just that. For example, we have things like the Moai statues from Rapa Nui, the island, the Easter Island as it is called, and also that was created by the Muans, the Nakal people, according to James Churchward. And the concept of Mu wasn't even just left alone, it was something that people kept bringing up. It wasn't just some 2-3 guys that thought of it, it was mentioned by literally the creator of the Turkish Republic, so Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He said that possibly Mu was the homeland of the Turkic people, which is a whole other deal. Then there's people like John Newbrough, which made a map of antediluvian times, we saw the times before the the great flood of the Bible. And in this map he showed Mu, so he thought Mu existed and he put it in this map. We have things like Louis Jacoliot that created a translation for Sanskrit texts he found in India, and also he mentioned Mu, basically. He didn't mention exactly Mu, but he found a continent that was exactly like it in these texts. So once again, we have some sort of connection between the Indian parts of the world and the Native American parts of the world, which according to these people are one other ones of the proofs that are needed to explain why Mu existed. So all of this is basically the theory of Mu. But once again, in this map, in this 3.0 map of Beyond the Ice Walls, which of course is this huge world building project that brings around all these continents and places to explain and to discover. According to the lore, basically what happened is that Mu didn't really sunk, but it was destroyed, but not because of earthquakes or something. It was like a multipolar world war, kind of like ancient world war between these people and the Subnotians. And the Subnotians, especially the type of Subnotians that lived in Mu, which of course called the Nakal, but actually called as a scientific term Homo erectus pacifica, were the population that lived there, and they were super advanced, as mentioned earlier. But the reason they were super advanced was because of the fact that they had Azov, pure potential energy. I remember mentioning it in the last video, so probably look at that. And this pure potential energy made them almost like not really mortal or gods, but they were definitely more than just human beings of the normal sort, or at least this is how this map kind of explains it. They were almost gigantic in their sizes. They were just a whole other deal, and this relates to the whole Walls of Asgard thing, Valhalla. We find a lot of these themes in this map, the history of the Sunken Oceans, and so on and so on. But I wanted to focus more on the parts of Mu that are mentioned in like historical records and theories of such people as James Churchward, Le Plongeon, etc., etc. But yeah, basically after being destroyed, according to this map, it was rebuilt 101, scale 1:1 in Akupara, which honestly I didn't even find an explanation for. I find this the most implausible version, because I would understand something more like a transportation of a landmass, but just destroying it and recreating it just sounds a bit far-fetched. I don't know. I mean, we know how to create artificial islands. We've seen that in the South China Sea, right here. China does that a lot, but like a continent? I mean, if the landmass of the world is so big that we can actually find landmass even in the wastes, I guess it's not impossible. But then again, not easy either, right? So now that we're done with Mu, which was of course the cherry of the video, you can say that, it's the main part of the video, I wanted to look a bit up to these two little places right here, which are basically off the coasts of Horus, the continent we looked at in the last video, because I think mentioning them and not skipping them is the right thing to do, because of course there are some little islands we might have skipped. I don't really remember, but probably we did. But I try to find information about everything, and if I find something that is interesting, I might as well talk about it instead of just skipping it and going on to the next big landmass or something. So these two, the Cup of Poseidon and the Panoptica, are very, very interesting, or rather I think Panoptica is pretty interesting. Cup of Poseidon, I will probably start with this one because it's the least interesting of the two, at least to me. It's more like a geographical wonder than it is like something more like we've seen with Mu. So for the Cup of Poseidon and the Emerald Arches, we actually have a better map to actually show you, one more updated to the recent times. I think this is kind of outdated. It was just not shown as detailed as it was supposed to be, and it's basically a very small archipelago, very small island. What this island is just this place with very, very, very tall, extremely tall cliffs. Specifically this one right here, which we can see it looks kind of like an atoll, but it is not an atoll. Actually, it is something very different. It's like this kind of mountain that just goes out of the waters like an insane kind of volcano, and it has like a crater inside of it, like a huge crater. In fact, it's probably of volcanic origin, I might assume, and this crater is filled with water, but it is like very big for what we can believe. Like, if you look at this size-wise, this is comparable, kind of comparable to places like, I would say it's like half of Madagascar. That's how big we're talking. That's like very relevant. Imagine an island half as Madagascar that is filled to the brim with water at this extremely high altitude. It almost freezes over, especially in the winter. Like, it's just something so incredible if you think about it. And that's not it. In fact, these deep waters that are in this basically cup, which is why the name, of course, of the island is this Cup of Poseidon. Obviously, there's no real need to explain that, but these waters are so deep. Also, these kind of, like, I guess, more horizontal, diagonal islands that we can see here are very, very, very steep as well, and like high altitude. And they have like a stair-step geography where land is divided into a series of plateaus, increasing in height from the northern to the southern coasts towards the center. And we have a lot of multiple biomes that cannot be seen in this original map, but in the other one are pretty much visible. We have like deserts, we have like pluvial forests and rainforests. We have regular kind of like shrublands, then we have grasslands, and of course the high mountain peaks. When it comes to flora, and I don't really know what this bird lives here, and I obviously don't know what kind of animals live here, but I know that there are some, so it's something to look up. I mean, if we ever manage to travel all the way here, it would be pretty cool to, you know, see what's living in it. Definitely a really nice thing for the eyes. Talking about eyes, Panoptica, gaze of the all-seeing eye. So this one is kind of crazy. This one is kind of crazy. You might know what this refers to if you're like very online, I guess, but or just well taught. So let's talk about Panoptica for a second. The gaze of the all-seeing eye. So after millennia of being uninhabited, the island of Panoptica was reached by the Adaic. So the Adaic brings us back. It brings us really back into the first series I did about the first ring beyond these walls, so Atlas. And we saw that differently from this one, which kind of like makes me research everything and has like no actual lore. It only has like these continents and names, and I have to do all the research. The original one also had lore and like explanations in the map itself, and the Adaic was basically the explanation that the East India Company of the Dutch and the Company of the English fused together to create this like huge enterprise in the colonial ages, which basically created outposts all around the world, including, according to this explanation, even Panoptica. So the Adaic colonized it, but it collapsed. The Adaic ended up collapsing. It could not support itself. The British and Dutch governments kind of like rebought it from the original private entrepreneurs that owned it. And after its collapse, the islanders were given no way to escape, no way to flee Panoptica. And now it's under an Orwellian dictatorship that decides to employ the idea of the Panopticon, hence the name of the island. So what is the Panopticon? The Panopticon was a dystopian project for an ideal prison. It was created by Jeremy Bentham during the French Revolution, so we're talking late 1700s. There was a single surveiller for the Panopticon that could have done an observation of all the subjects without any of them knowing they were being watched at all times. It was basically the way to strip any sort of privacy from the prisoners and let the prison guards know exactly everything that was happening inside of the prison. The name Panopticon actually originates from something completely different. It is coming from ancient Greek mythological beings, like the giant Argos Panoptes, which was a gigantic guardian with 100 eyes. Of course, being a guardian with 100 eyes made him, very good at guarding, hence the name Panoptica. So this, of course, brings me to a talk about mass surveillance and how nowadays, I just realized that like most people would be like putting fucking ad here about some stupid shit. I don't know. I just figured that the way I'm saying this, it sounds like I'm starting to like try to put advertisements in it. No, I don't do advertisements. I have refused basically all ads that have tried to contact me, so I'm not doing advertisements. But it's interesting that it sounded kind of like I was going for that, right? Whatever. So yeah, it sounds like this is just mass surveillance. This is just what we have in the real world now. We have, cameras everywhere, whoever, basically apart from your own home, which is also surveilled because of course all the, technological things you own in your home are constantly listening, but at least they're not watching, at least you're like free of the watchful eyes. But outside you have cameras everywhere. Recently in Britain, they're like using all these cameras to spy on people everywhere where they go. It's just crazy. It's getting very bad, and the Panoptica, which used to be a dystopian nightmare, is more reality than it is not. Of course, we're not prisoners yet, but that depends on what you think. So yeah, that's kind of where it will be for this episode. There's a mention of the Isle of Man, the Castaway Island. Look, it's the Island of Man. It's here. It's not near Britain for some reason. Ain't that cool? It's missing. Okay, I don't even know what to say about this one. I'll let you guys think about this. So yeah, that's about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Always remember to support the official creators of the map that are on the DeviantArt link below. If you want to look at the map in high quality for yourself, there's that. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and come back next time. See you, and see you next time. Bye bye.